So anyway, thanks for jumping on, guys. We're going to go over just some cultivation changes that you will experience when you add under canopy to your facility, your grow, your tent, whatever it may be. These are pretty standardized across however big of scale you are, the smallest to the largest, and really doesn't matter on your lighting types, the fertilizer you're running. So we'll kind of get into that. But as for, we'll start with water volume. And when we say water volume, we mean how much water your plants are consuming throughout the day. And we definitely employ a lot of crop steering. And so, when you're looking at an irrigation volume increase, we're looking at how much is being used throughout the day. But if you're generative, you need to make sure you get that increase taken care of in that 2 to 3 hour, maybe 4 hour irrigation window in the morning, and then allow that dry back throughout the night. And you need to manage that appropriately because your plants are going to consume more. They're going to want more from you with the addition of under canopy. So sometimes increasing your substrate size is a good way to mitigate that extra volume needed, so that your plants have a little more reserve in the substrate. And then conversely, when we're into bulking, to really offset this extra volume, it's pretty easy during bulking because you can just send a later P2 shot, right? You can send a shot later into the day if you're usually irrigating until 4 hours before lights off to get your desired dry back. When you add under canopy, you can push that to 3 hours before lights off or 2 hours before lights off. I think standard protocol is you want to stop irrigating 1 hour before lights off, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do to make sure they don't dry out too far. So we're really looking at about 10 to 15% irrigation increase. What's odd is the bigger substrate you have, whether it's cocoa or rock wool, the less we see that need. So if you're in tiny little pots, you're going to see a big irrigation volume increase. But if you're in 4x4 to slab, we see that a little less of a percentage. And then same with like if you're in a bigger cocoa or straight cocoa, there's a lot of water retention available there. So a little bit less need, if you will. But if you're in those tiny little 1 gallons or you're running a 70-30 perlite to cocoa mix, you're probably going to experience this a little more because your substrate doesn't have the capacity that a straight cocoa or a bigger substrate would have. So very easy to manage if you have substrate sensors. Again, crop steering is out there. It's easy to manage because we have these parameters to stay within at certain points in the plant's life. So managing that is really just looking at your dry back goals and making sure they don't get too dry and making sure you can put that right amount of volume on them without adding any additional plant stress or overwatering them. But you should be just fine. And for the guys that are in beds doing living soil, and I'm actually sitting at a facility now that has their OCal certified for organic soil in California, we actually see a bigger increase of it. How do I say this? You're able to dry out your beds quicker because of the extra light, which allows you to feed a little more, which in turn actually drives the plants to consume more and yield that comes with it. So you're adding light to your room, you're going to get yield, but the wet and dry cycle is very important in cannabis, and when you're running those big beds, it's kind of hard to get those plants really established, get those roots going. So adding under canopy actually speeds up that process. So just something we've noticed with no-till or big beds, organic soil, what have you. So again, you've got a lot of water holding capacity. You may not need to add more right away, but your plants are probably going to the roots are going to colonize the soil faster, leading to you having to irrigate more often. Any questions on that so far?
What light do I use when I have mixed light?
Ooh, the R8s or the R8 with the far red. So mixed light, top light is it's one of our favorites right now. We've got a room going in at the R&D spot at Blueprint. They just hung them the other day. And basically the idea around that is you've got the best of both worlds already in the mixed spectrum top light. So when it comes to choosing the under canopy, you're going with the most efficient light that we have, and that would be the R8. Red is The R8 unit is more red. Red is, the most efficient color in the spectrum to deliver to cannabis plants. They also love red. That's why they love HPS. So keep doing your thing with the mix light. You could do the R8 or the R8 with far red. That's just our basic R8 model with added far red diodes. It's not an independent channel, but there's a little extra in there. So those are what we would recommend. Anything else? All right, cool. Well, I'll just keep going. So we talked irrigation, and now we can talk food, EC, PPMs. We talk in EC, but PPMs also kind of work. So with that, food is a little harder to standardize. Like the food increase is a little harder to standardize because people irrigate and feed at such different rates with different fertilizers that it's not as easy. There's too many variables, and really, like, water is water, but food can be, it just depends on what is making up that food, what is making up that EC. So something we noticed is that guys who run powders, they're usually feeding at a higher EC, and they see more often we see people who run powders needing to increase their EC more than people who run liquids. And that comes down to the availability of those nutrients in the substrate. It does not matter which one you do. We're just saying, hey, powders, you may need to do that increase. And that increase looks about 5 to 10%. So if you're at a 3.0 EC going in, very simple to pop it to 3.2 or 3.3 input, and really manage any deficiencies that you may have right off the bat. I myself have a slower and lower approach, and primarily growing under HPS with some LED rooms mixed in. I feed at a lower rate than the standard 3.0 to 3.2 right now. I'm usually around a 2.5 to a 2.8. And with under Canopy Edition, we really peak at 3.0 if we need it, but we try not to hit that if we don't have to. But like I said, for powders, you could probably see that 10% increase easily. For liquids, you may want to hold off and not really do that increase. And for both applications, I would wait for your first run to see if you see any deficiencies, and make sure those deficiencies are actual nutrient and not a water deficiency or water stress, because they can kind of look similar. Very lime green can either be water stress or it can be a nitrogen deficiency, right? So you have both there. So make sure you're testing on a plant or a genetic that you really understand and you know what a deficiency looks like in that plant. And I'm gonna just put this out here. There's certain times where plant stress and water stress is encouraged and actually brings out the best in the plant, early on, and then during ripening, of course, generative phases. So don't freak out if your plants get a little less green than you're used to.
Everyone from Green Planet is showing up and showing some love.
Oh, what's up, Green Planet? Canadian distributor, hit them up if you guys need anything.
305 Police asks, how long do I leave the far red on after 12 hours of light?
Man, so we're testing that right now. If you go check out our latest reel that we posted this morning, it's our first trial that came down with an independent far red channel that's on our chroma unit, and we ran that far red from day 7, 12 hours a day, just typical flowering light cycle, and 15 minutes after lights off. We definitely saw a different growth pattern. The plants are taller, they're stretchier, which is far red is known to put out or to make happen. And then the stack wasn't as great, of course, because the plants are stretching more. So what we're going to do on our next trial is we're not going to turn on the far red line until stretch is complete, and we're going to see what kind of effect that has on, basically it's a half a bench with far red and a half a bench without far red. Same spectrum being delivered to them, but one has the addition of the independent far red channel in our chroma unit that's dropping later in quarter 2. But yeah, so we I don't have a straight answer for you yet, but my hunch is that far red is going to be very effective in lowering flowering times, like dropping from 63 days to we harvested this room at 53. But we don't particularly know. But again, sorry, my hunch is that starting far red after stretch and you're going into bulking, that's when this will be a good application of the technology. Because far red is, there's something there. We just have to figure out how to apply it. So hope that answered your question, Bully. You've been supporting us a long time. I recognize that name. Anything else? Okay, no questions, guys? Fine, I'll just keep rambling. That's fine.
In the Instagram comment, we did have a few people talk about resin content and hash and why.
Oh, and see wash. Yeah, well, we're gonna have the flour tested, but washing with a far red, that's something that we just did not have set up. And honestly, this flowering, it finished 10 days earlier than we thought. Like I barely made it back from Spain to catch this harvest, so we were not prepared for how early that room finished. So
Non-R13 asks, why does LED cause light stress easier than HPS or CMH? Like with CMH I can veg 500 ppfd, but with LED I can't veg with more than like 300 ppfd.
I'm not 100% sure on that, but they are completely different sources of light. And a lot of times we see, cultivators with LEDs push higher ppfd levels. And that's where you see a lot of plant stress, a lot of blown out tops. But in veg, I've actually experienced the opposite, where the CMH is it falls off and the intensity isn't enough to get the rapid growth we need in 2 weeks. Like usually it's a 2-week veg time. They flip to flower for 9 weeks. So a lot of times I'll come into facilities and we'll see they still have CMHs in the veg and they're struggling in veg. And so we retrofit with LEDs or checkerboard them. So I've actually experienced the opposite. So it may be something that your environment is cueing, like your environment isn't set up to run LEDs because it does need to be a little warmer in there and it does need to be a little more humid. So your CMHs may be producing really good plant growth because it's drier and they can work in that environment. The LEDs take a completely different environment. This is when like LEDs really brought the conversation of VPD to market, which VPD is great. I use it as a guide. It is not an absolute rule. I would check your leaf surface temperature and make sure you have a difference of at least 2 degrees from your air temp to your plant temperature. You want your plant to be cooler than the outside air. So that may be something, if you want to watch your LED veg room compared to your CMH veg room, go get an IR gun on Amazon. They're like $20. They all work the same. Don't buy the $500 one, get the $20 one. And start watching that. You really want that 2 to 3 degree difference between your air temp to your plant temp. Hope that helps.
Something else that you've talked about is proximity to the lights themselves as well.
Yeah, that's true. It could be how close those LEDs are, right? And I mean, if you're measuring your intensity, maybe that's not a big one, but if those LEDs are kind of slammed on there and there's not a lot of airflow, that may that may cause an issue. Again, that's environmental. And if your CMHs are really high, that's, allowing for more airflow. So I know everybody likes to pin their LEDs, especially the multi-bars. They like to get them as close as possible, but I still like 18 inches minimum from, multi-bar LED to the top of the plant, just to maintain airflow and make sure you have a homogeneous temperature throughout your room. If you slam that light on top of your plants, you're really cutting down any kind of airflow that can happen on the tops. And another little point about that, we talk in, lighting causes photosynthesis, obviously, but convection, the movement of air across the leaf, also drives photosynthesis as well. So you want to make sure you have plenty of air movement in there. That may be affecting your LEDs.
In terms of DLI.
Yeah. Good question already. DLI.
Do you lower your top lights to compensate for the addition of other candles?
I do, but this isn't anything that you can SOP. This isn't anything that's standardized. I like lowering top lights. I think there is more to gain by holistically and uniformly lighting your plant than to just add more light and continue to grow as you did before under canopy. The guys that are the growers that are getting the best return on their investment, and we gauge that by grams per watt. How many grams are you harvesting, dry grams are you harvesting per watt of lightage used? And you can, those watts can go into HVACs and DHUM, you can go down that rabbit hole. But for easy math, we like to use how many watts of lighting. So the guys that are really crushing it are the ones that are on like 645s or 640s up top. Doesn't matter the brand, just 645 watts. And 2 Favens underneath, which is a total of 240 watts. So a total of 880, let's just call it 880, almost 900 watts in a 4x4 or a 4x5, depending on how wide your bench is. Those are the cultivators that are consistently hitting, 1.7 to 2.0 grams per watt. And that is the real telltale sign of efficiency and use of your lighting. If you add watts to your room, you're going to get a yield increase, but there is a point of diminishing return. There is yield dilution. I do believe in yield dilution. I know it's kind of it's something we don't talk about enough in this industry. But I do believe in reducing your top lights if you're running LEDs. If you're running HPS, if you dim them, you're limiting their spectral output. They are supposed to be ran at 100%. So a little trickier there. But if you're running LEDs, I'm a big fan of really not going over 1,000 micromole up top, and positioning your under canopies to make sure you're getting a good mix of bottom and top light in the middle of the plant. That's our goal. A lot of the yield potential lays right in the middle of your plant, so you want a good mix of top and bottom light in there. So long story short, I like reducing top light if it's LED. If it's HPS, I really don't touch it. Sorry.
The important questions.
Ooh.
Mucho mango.
Oh, let's talk, Barker. I'm around the corner from you right now. What's up?
Tim, are the Raiders going to blow it at the draft this year?
The Raiders always blow it at the draft this year, and I believe you're a Raiders fan, or you're a Niners fan. I don't know. We got Geno Smith, man. I don't even know what that means, but we haven't been good since Rich Gannon. So I don't know, man. I was 7, or I was 11. I was 11. I cried during halftime when they lost the Super Bowl. Okay, I was that invested. So thanks for that. I needed that. Thanks, buddy. I'll see you later today, probably.
Nanar said yield dilution is very real and also well documented in other world.
Yeah, for sure. And it just what does yield dilution look like? Because we don't have other crops are easy. There's so much data and so much science on them that it's okay, here's the yield dilution. Here's a big strawberry. It has 0 nutrients in it. But THC is, everybody's hung up on THC, and that's what sells cannabis right now, and that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. But if you dilute the THC, it's really the what's the effect when it's everything? The entourage effect, right? So if it lowers THC, is that a big deal? I don't know, because I don't go to the club looking for 35% THC. I look for the stuff that smells the best. And I know has the best effects, and whether it's medicinal or if it's for play. So it just depends on what that yield dilution looks like. Now you can completely boof out your plants and have yield dilution just using your eyes and have some really crappy looking finished product, and then it's not moving. Doesn't matter how many pounds you pull per light. But it's just tough because we don't have these set standards and set parameters yet in this industry. So I just want to dig into more yield dilution, terps, cannabinoids, THC, and then the visual, of course. There's qualitative and then there's quantitative. We need a little more quantitative on our side, but I'm sure somebody's working on that.
Dr. Riley.
Dr. Riley, yeah, she's working on everything. She's like, there's like 5 of her, I guess. And she does a lot of work.
305 Bullies asks again. Asks, how about if it's mixed light? Does that still matter for the lighting conversation?
On for DLI. No, light, so there are different sources of light, but light intensity is light intensity. Almost like I still would try to keep your LED. I would try to keep a uniform spread of intensity in your room. That's probably more key than anything else when it comes to mixed light up top. So I would try, if you're HPS, and like I said, we try not to dim HPS. You can do it, it's fine. A lot of people do it. I'm not saying it's the worst thing ever. But I would match your LED to your HPS output and not the reverse, because it's easier to dim an LED. It's better to dim an LED than dim an HPS. I hope that helps.
I love Mac Owen says, anyone notice issues with warmer root temps from undercanopy?
No, actually, that was something we watched really early on. And if you have any kind of substrate sensor that does, temperature, EC, and water content, you can run them. You can run your undercanopies, see if you can notice an uptick. We've never really seen that unless you have your lights like absolutely beaming at the substrate and they're not high enough. So we want to make sure those lights are above the lip of the substrate so that you're not wasting light and heating up that substrate. But we've actually not documented anything substantial. And root temp is very touchy. If you're feeding too high of a temperature of water, you can increase your root temp, and that is just asking for pathogens of every sort. So it's I think preferred is like 62 to 65 water temp input. Don't quote me on that. Definitely Google it. But like that's been my goal, and root temp, same thing. We want to keep it very consistent. But yeah, nothing major there. And then Alex, who's the one asking the questions for me, he's behind the camera. He does a lot of work with that in rooms of both double stacked and single tier. And has never really documented it, because that was one of the things that he was very interested in when we first started messing around with undercanopy, or when I first introduced him to undercanopy like 3 years ago.
Even doing IR on the soil medium itself, that face of the light, you don't really notice an increase.
Oh, okay.
I think it depends on possibly what fixtures you use. With the Favens, we run typically cooler than most other.
Yeah, we run about 10 degrees cooler than every other competitor on the market, and 5 degrees Celsius for everybody who's not in America. But Alex was saying that even if you use an IR gun on the substrate itself, you don't really register anything. So you can run we run side by sides with and without undercanopy, and there's really no difference.
And tons of sensors with the Teros 12s and Teros 1s of measuring the actual.
Yeah, Teros 12s, Teros 1s have been used, is what he's saying. Like all things that are very standard in our industry these days.
Would you Cool Cultivation asks, would you increase the undercanopy at the same, or increase that undercanopy at the same time that you would increase your PPFD on your overhead lights?
Yeah. If you take that approach to your top light and bottom light, I would just do it at a slower pace. Less is more. The goal of undercanopy is to get light on the lower buds sooner than later. So it's not getting to 100% intensity as fast as possible. It's getting light on the plant and those lower buds early in flower so that those buds can mature at the same rate as the tops, right? So those lower buds are maturing at the same rate as the tops. So that's like we're not a day one start. We are, I like between days 7 and 9. Even earlier, if your plants are robust and ripping and they're like fully in flower and they're stretching like crazy, you can definitely turn them on. But we like to start them at like 45, 50%, let them get used to that percentage for a couple of days and then increase from there. So my typical guideline is to be at full intensity by like day 21 to 24. And again, there's no rush. If your plants aren't ready for it, don't. So yeah, you can ramp intensity on your top light and bottom light at the same rate. I would just do it more incrementally on both. I would do like 5% both, or if you're usually doing 20% on your top light, maybe do 10% and ease into it a little more. Do it for your first run, and then next run, try a little faster and see what happens. Like that's for your first run, always slow and low, and then as you get comfortable with under canopies, you can ramp up from there. But you can't take stress back, so be easy on it.
We hear a lot of people that like vegging in place, that like turning them on.
Oh yeah, if you veg in place in your room, you can probably turn them on like day one, no issue. But for like a commercial schedule, when they're usually coming from a veg room and then they're getting placed in the flower room and then potentially flipped that very next day, it's good to let them acclimate to the room, turn on the lights a little later once you know your plants are, as a cultivator, you know exactly when you come in that within that first week of flower and your plants have like exponentially grown from the day before, you're like, oh, they know they're in flower. And that's a good time to really turn on the under canopy. And, like I said, 5 to 7 is a good time, 7 to 8. No rush. Just try to get that light on early to make sure those bud sites, as they pop around day 10 to 13, are having light on them, because we want those to mature at the same rate as the top.
Grow Green Planet says, believe the hype. I've personally never seen a product that pays for itself in its first crop.
Who's behind that? Who's behind that page, Green Planet?
Should I dim? I'm an educated farmer, so should I dim my?
Good handle. We're all uneducated farmers. Sorry, go
ahead. He says, should I dim under canopy light in the last 10 days of the flower cycle?
Yeah, so this is totally genetic to genetic. I think that it all depends on your flower goal, right? If you need very, very purple, like here in Northern California, we can eat purple weed or it does not move. If you need very, very purple, like finished product, if you reduce your light intensity, there's a potential that you don't get to that like purple saturation that you need. But in the same aspect, there are some genetics that just don't love high intensity that late in flower, so dimming them down to about 80% is a really safe place to be. And you can kind of see this. You're gonna have a little, like a lot of people cultivate with leaf tip burn on every crop. It's not bad. But if you see any of the actual bud tips starting to turn a little bit or starting to singe, definitely turn those down. Usually it's on older genetics, and for like all the people growing candy, because we all have to grow a ton of candy, it really is like, I talk to cultivators all the time that dim them down, and I talk to cultivators all the time that would never think of dimming them down with candy. So it's almost like, how high is your substrate EC? What's your temperature in flower? Like, it's all these environmental factors and other factors, and then if dimming down your under canopy is the way to remedy all those different factors, then I would just go ahead and do it. You're not really going to lose any yield. Like I would, if you're worried about dimming them down and losing yield potential, it's very minimal when you get to that. You've pretty much locked in your yield when you get to week 8, in my opinion.
Also, hash production, they're turning them off earlier
to
not ripen the heads too far.
Yeah. Okay, so with Alex just brought up a good point. Hash production, like you're getting maturity of trichomes throughout your plant. You're getting yield increase, and you're getting more mature, more uniform product, so it's washing better. So people are dimming those down or turning them off earlier so that the heads don't over mature, because there's a certain swollenness.
Age and maturity.
There's a certain age and maturity of trikes that make it for a very, very good wash. So you want to nail that, and that is very specific to cultivars and genetics. I'm very lay when it comes to that. I am not the pro. Alex does more of that.
Jackpot 2.0 says anyone that's not running Faven under canopies doesn't.
Thanks.
For anyone running Faven under canopies, don't even hesitate. The 50 and 30% yield is real.
Nice. Yeah, Jackpot, man, you've been running our gear for almost a year now. Right here in Sacramento, we appreciate the support. I see your stickers everywhere when I'm driving through the green zone.
Under Canopy King says, does far red decrease yield?
Under Canopy King? Oh, okay. We don't know yet. So if you watch our latest reel, we just did that trial for the first time with a dedicated far red line. And by the look of it, it definitely did. But I think saying that far red decreases yield is not telling the whole story. It's when you use that tool is really going to show. So we're going to continue to kind of pull at this thread, and on the next trial, we're going to probably turn on the far red line later in flower after stretch to see if we can get a more uniform plant, less stretchy plant, and maybe get a better stack out of it. But there is something to far red that typical LEDs are missing that we're really pulling on. We just need to know when to apply it.
I think a good thing to talk about too is maybe the differences of like the far red and the R8 far reds and the independent far red itself.
Yeah, so we have two fixtures with far red. We have the Chroma, which comes out later in Q2. That's spectrum control, dimming, and an independent far red channel. And then we have our R8 with added far red diodes. That is not an independent channel. That is very static. And we added that far red really just for people who are looking to gain a little bit of far red exposure with our typical R8 unit. And we've seen no decrease in yield using those. So again, hard to say if far red is really negatively affecting yield. I know the scientific study came out a couple weeks ago that basically just blew up far red for any kind of use, but I am always hesitant when the science is done not in a typical cultivation that you would see in the US, California, doesn't matter what state. It needs to be done in typical cultivation settings and not really scientific settings. Like, scientific settings are great, they have their application, but this plant has bucked scientific norms so many times that I've experienced and watched big ag guys come into the space and get kind of roughed up a little bit when they've made the jump to cannabis. So I really want to see this for myself, and we're going to be reporting back on what far red does. So again, I'm not all for bro science, but I also think science done in a lab is a little different than what we experience in the applied world. 5 more minutes? Okay, get your questions in, because I'm only doing this for another 5 minutes.
Hey, Bobby.
Hey, Bobby.
An educated farmer again.
Another one.
Do you turn your light off for 36 to 48 hours when you're starting flower set?
Nah, man, that's definitely bro science. If you want to flip to flower faster, control your water availability. Like, if you want to get them raging, you want to get those hairs set early, I would just control the water availability in your substrate. And what I mean by that is how much volumetric water content is sitting in your substrate when your lights turn on, and what that's at before your first irrigation. The whole lights off thing has been going on for decades, way older than me. It theoretically makes sense, but it's just inducing them to stress that they don't need. They don't want to be in darkness. So I'm against that. I have buddies that still do it. We're still friends, so it's fine, but I do think it's bro science. You can control the plant a lot better when they're consistent, and messing with the light cycle is not consistent, in my opinion.
Know Ya Grow says, I think you have the blue and UVA to match the far red. I think that's the best way to use it without decreasing your yield. It actually completes the deep red.
Interesting. Yeah, UV is the next thing we tip into, because that's an obvious next step. We just don't know what we don't know, so we'll start easy and kind of ramp from there. But a more full spectrum makes sense, and mimicking the sun, of course. Nobody loves outdoor, but I'm telling you right now, I prefer some greenhouse outdoor flower. That's just my roots, though. I started growing outdoor. I learned indoor, went outdoor in depth for almost 9 years. Legalization hit in California. Once it hit here, I didn't have the money to go legal. Went back to school. That's where I was introduced to LEDs, and then got a job running an indoor for Alien Labs and Connected, and totally got my ass kicked for the first 4 months. So I'm partial to outdoor and mimicking the sun at any point. Makes the best rosin too, by far. By far.
Um, I love Mac Owen says, how tall do you aim for canopy with the R8 and LED style bar overhead?
Yeah, I really like. I mean, look at your LED, your top light penetration. It's probably around 2 to 2.5 feet. Same thing with a Faven under canopy. We're looking at 2 to 2.5 feet. I really like a canopy depth of about 4 feet. I think that is optimal for um, HPS or LED top light. I think 4 feet is getting the best of both worlds, and you're almost guaranteed if you've de-leafed correctly, if you've strategically de-leafed, and your plants are open, not overly de-leafed, but like taking enough so you're getting a mix of top and bottom light in the middle of the plant. I believe 4 feet is a really, really safe spot to be. You can go less than that, you can go more than that, but I do believe that's how you get a uniform product, top to bottom, maturity, density, uniformity, and color. About 4 feet of canopy.
From I love Mac Owen again, you mentioned different leafing pruning schedules. What would
Yeah.
that look like?
Yeah. So the different schedule is like if you're in a commercial setting, you're really trying to limit the touches on the plant because you just don't have that much time in your weekly workflows to touch every plant in the facility multiple times. So easy rule of thumb is I like to do a cleanup once they get moved into the flower room, just like the lower leaves we call them cut leaves, the ones that were like involved in the cloning process. We get rid of those. Anything that maybe any lower nodes that may be straggling like out of the soil or anything like that, I like to clean those up and then make sure that none of the leaves are like laying on the under canopy lights. Remove those because those are just getting in the way. They're not going to help you. They're probably going to burn too if they're actually laying on the light. If they're within a half inch, they're not going to burn. You can probably leave them, but if they're laying on the light, I would take them. So that's like your day 1 to 3 cleanup. Very small. I usually do about 4 to 6 inches, just making room for the light to penetrate into the canopy. Second cleanup is a standard cleanup that everybody does at post stretch, and post stretch is really a strategic de-leaf, right? You're looking at your canopy depth, okay, where we've got about 4 feet. Let's make sure we can activate as much of this as possible without taking too many leaves. So that's when you go in. I like to go right up the main stem, pull all the big fan leaves off with the petioles, and then kind of take a step back and look at where the clusters of leaves are and attack those first. Usually if you can get that done, you take all the big fan leaves that are coming off the main stem and then look at your clusters. Usually that's all you really have to do. That's like a strategic de-leaf in my opinion. And then lastly, the final strip. We still final strip, right? Take off pretty much all your big fan leaves with 2 weeks to go. It helps the ripening process, helps the uniformity of product from top to bottom, getting very, very good light on everything. So we're still doing that. So big change there. Instead of under clearing at the end of week 3 after stretch, you're just strategic de-leafing. You're just taking the leaves and you want to leave as many viable nodes as possible because that's all going to turn into usable product. Good? All right, we're going to cut it there, guys. 45 minutes goes hella fast. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you. Stay tuned for more updates on the far red. Thanks, guys.